My daughter told me to leave her house on Christmas Eve because I lost my job. I was standing on her front porch in the cold, my suitcase still in my hand, while inside her perfectly decorated tree glowed like nothing had happened. My grandson stood halfway down the stairs watching me with wide, confused eyes. My son-in-law didn't say a word. And my daughter, she looked at me like I had just become a problem she couldn't afford. What she didn't realize was that she had just thrown away far more than she thought. If you've ever felt unwanted by your own family, I want you to stay with me on this story. And before we go on, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? What time is it where you are? I read every comment. And if this already hits close to home, don't forget to like and subscribe, because this story might change the way you see love, family, and what it really means to be needed. My name is Andrea Kelley, and for most of my life, I was the person people relied on when things went wrong. Not the loud kind of strong, not the kind that makes speeches or demands attention. I was the quiet kind, the one who fixed problems before anyone else even noticed them. The one who stayed late, paid early, showed up on time, and never made a scene. After my husband Thomas passed away 8 years ago, that part of me only grew stronger. Grief has a strange way of reshaping you. Some people fall apart. I didn't have the luxury of that. Instead, I leaned into structure, routine, responsibility. I went back to work 2 weeks after the funeral, not because I wasn't hurting, but because I didn't know what else to do with the silence in the house. We had built a steady life together in Columbus, Ohio. Nothing extravagant, but everything earned. Thomas had always been careful with money, thoughtful about the future. Security isn't about what you have, he used to say. It's about what you can handle when things go wrong. I held on to that. Our daughter Melissa was 28 when he died. Already married, already starting her own family out in Dublin, a suburb that liked to look wealthier than it actually was. At first, she called me every day, sometimes twice. We cried together. We remembered him together. Back then, it still felt like we were on the same side of life. But slowly, things changed. Not all at once. Not in a way you could point to and say, that's when it happened. It was smaller than that. Subtle. Like a shift in tone you only notice after the conversation is already different. Melissa didn't stop loving me. I don't believe that. But somewhere along the way, love started getting mixed up with something else. Expectation. It started the first time she called me in a panic about money. Ryan's real estate commissions had slowed down that year. The market had dipped, and suddenly their budget, already stretched thinner than I was comfortable with, couldn't keep up. She didn't ask directly at first. She never did. She told me the situation. She sighed at the right moments. She mentioned the kids, and I filled in the rest. I wired the money that same afternoon. It felt natural. That's what mothers do, right? You step in when your child is struggling. You make sure they don't fall too hard. But then it happened again. And again. There was always a reason. Always something that made it sound temporary. A school tuition payment that came earlier than expected. A medical bill insurance didn't fully cover. A car repair that couldn't wait. I never said no. Not once. Over time, those emergencies became normal. I started noticing that Melissa stopped sounding embarrassed when she called. The hesitation faded. The gratitude shortened. What used to be Mom? I don't know how to ask you this. Turned into Mom, we're a little tight this month. We. As if I were part of their household budget. I told myself it was fine. That I could afford it. That helping them meant stability for my grandchildren, Ethan and Sophie, and I loved those children more than anything in this world. Ethan with his thoughtful little questions and quiet observations, Sophie with her bright laugh and the way she still reached for my hand whenever we walked together. I convinced myself I wasn't helping Melissa. I was helping them. But the truth, it all blurred together. By the time they bought their house in Dublin, a beautiful 2-story place with white columns and a kitchen that looked like something out of a magazine, I had already contributed more than I ever planned to. The down payment gap, closing costs, a few unexpected adjustments that came up during the process. Melissa called it a blessing. I called it making sure my family was secure. After that, something settled into place. A pattern. Holidays became bigger. Birthdays more elaborate. The kids went to a private school that cost more per year than my first car. Melissa started hosting gatherings where everything from the table settings to the catering felt carefully curated. Perfect. And every time I walked into that house, I felt 2 things at once. Pride and something I couldn't quite name. Because I knew, even if no one said it out loud, that a piece of that perfect life had my fingerprints on it. Not just financially, emotionally. I was the one who showed up early to help cook, the one who stayed late to clean, the one who remembered everyone's preferences, allergies, schedules. I made things easier, smoother, better, and somewhere along the way, that became my role. Not mother, not guest. Support system. Still, I didn't question it, because every time Ethan ran into my arms or Sophie climbed into my lap with a book, it felt worth it. It felt like love. And maybe in some ways it was. But love without boundaries has a quiet way of changing shape. It stops being something shared and starts becoming something expected. Looking back now, I can see the signs I ignored. The way Melissa would casually mention upcoming expenses before I had even taken off my coat. The way she stopped asking if I was okay and started assuming I was. The way Ryan, always polite, always agreeable, rarely spoke up when these conversations happened, as if it wasn't his place to question the arrangement. And I let it all continue, because saying no would have changed the dynamic, and I wasn't ready to see what was underneath it. So I stayed the reliable one, the steady one, the one who could handle anything, even when deep down I was starting to feel something I didn't want to admit. Not resentment, not yet, but something close. A quiet awareness that my presence in that house was tied in ways no one acknowledged to what I could provide. And I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being sensitive, that family doesn't keep score, that love doesn't come with conditions. I believed that, right up until the moment I lost my job. And everything I thought was unconditional suddenly wasn't. For nearly 20 years, I walked into the same building every weekday morning with a sense of quiet certainty. The glass doors would slide open, the receptionist would nod, and I would take the elevator up to the 4th floor compliance and risk management. It wasn't a glamorous department. No one celebrated us. No one invited us to the big strategy dinners or featured us in company newsletters, but when something went wrong, we were the ones they called. My title was Senior Compliance Director, which sounds more impressive than it felt most days. What it really meant was this: I was responsible for making sure the company followed the rules financially, ethically, legally. I reviewed reports, audited internal processes, signed off on expense approvals, and flagged anything that didn't make sense. For most of my career, that system worked. Not perfectly, of course. No system ever does. But the issues were small, fixable, human error, not intentional deception, a misfiled receipt, a duplicate reimbursement, the kind of things you correct with a memo, not an investigation. That's why what I found in early December didn't sit right with me. It started with something minor, or at least it looked that way at first. An executive reimbursement file landed on my desk, routine review before year-end closing. High-level expenses, vendor payments, travel reimbursements. Nothing unusual about that, until I noticed a date. One entry showed a reimbursement request submitted on December 3rd, but the receipt attached to it was dated December 8th, 5 days in the future. At first I assumed it was a clerical mistake. Maybe the document had been uploaded incorrectly. It happens, so I flagged it, made a note, and moved on. But something about it lingered. The next day, I pulled the file again, and this time I looked closer. The receipt wasn't just mismatched in date, it had been edited. Subtly. Cleanly. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing. The formatting was consistent. The font matched, the alignment was precise. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. That's when I started digging. Quietly. I didn't announce anything. Didn't raise alarms. I simply began cross-checking other files tied to the same executive account. Reimbursement reports, vendor invoices, approval signatures. And what I found wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. Small discrepancies at first. A few $100s here, a duplicated invoice there, then larger amounts. Vendor contracts that didn't match the services listed. Approval signatures that looked off. Not forged badly, forged well. Too well. I remember sitting at my desk late one evening, long after most of the office had gone home, staring at the screen as the numbers lined up in ways they weren't supposed to. This wasn't carelessness. This was fraud. Not massive, not headline-grabbing, but steady, controlled. The kind of ongoing manipulation that hides in plain sight because it never spikes high enough to trigger automatic alarms, unless someone is looking for it. And now I was. The next morning, I brought a small portion of my findings to my direct supervisor, Mark Reynolds. Mark had been with the company almost as long as I had. Easygoing, well-liked, the kind of man who avoided conflict whenever possible. I trusted him, or at least I thought I did. I remember placing the file on his desk, explaining what I'd seen, keeping my voice calm and measured. "I think we need to take a closer look at these reimbursements," I said. "There are inconsistencies that don't add up." Mark skimmed the documents, his expression neutral at first, then something changed. It was subtle, a tightening around the eyes, a pause that lasted just a second too long. He closed the file. "Andrea," he said carefully, "I think you're reading too much into this." I blinked. "There are altered documents, or formatting errors," he replied. "We're closing out the fiscal year. Things get messy." I didn't argue. Not immediately, but I didn't let it go either. "I'd like to run a deeper audit," I said, "just to be sure." That's when he looked at me directly, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, there was something in his expression that made me uneasy. Not anger, not frustration. Warning. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. The room went still. "Why not?" I asked. Mark leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and folded his hands together. "Because sometimes," he said, choosing his words carefully, "it's better to focus on the work that's actually ours." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. "This is our work," I said. He didn't respond right away. Then he stood up, walked over to the door, and closed it. When he came back, his voice was lower. "There are people involved in those accounts who sit a lot higher than either of us," he said. "You start pulling threads like that, you don't just find mistakes, you create problems." "I'm supposed to ignore it?" I asked. "I'm telling you to be smart." That word, smart. It echoed in my head long after I left his office, because I understood exactly what he meant. Smart didn't mean right. Smart meant safe. Smart meant quiet. Smart meant looking the other way. I went back to my desk and sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my hands resting on the keyboard without moving. I thought about my job, my stability, my future. I thought about Melissa, about the kids, about everything that depended directly or indirectly on the fact that I had a steady income, and for a moment, just a moment, I considered letting it go, closing the file, moving on. No one would blame me. No one would even know. But then I heard Thomas's voice in my head as clear as if he were sitting beside me. Security isn't about what you have. It's about what you can handle when things go wrong. This was wrong, and I knew it. So I kept digging, not loudly, not recklessly, but thoroughly. I documented everything, made copies, cross-referenced accounts, built a timeline, every discrepancy, every altered document, every approval that didn't align. And I kept it to myself. I didn't tell Melissa. I didn't tell Denise. I didn't tell anyone who didn't absolutely need to know, because I wasn't just uncovering a mistake anymore. I was stepping into something that had consequences, real ones. By the second week of December, I had enough evidence to bring the matter formally to Human Resources and the Internal Audit Committee. When I did, the response was immediate, not explosive, controlled, too controlled. Meetings were scheduled quickly, doors were closed, voices were lowered. I was asked to provide documentation, which I did. I was thanked for my diligence, and then almost as quickly as it began, I was asked to step back, to allow leadership to handle the situation internally. That phrase? It sounded official, responsible. But underneath it, I could feel the same message Mark had given me. Stop. A few days later, I was called into another meeting. This one included HR legal and someone from corporate I had never met before. They were polite, professional, careful. They explained that due to organizational restructuring and the sensitive nature of ongoing internal reviews, my position was being eliminated, effective immediately. I remember sitting there listening, my hands folded neatly in my lap as if posture could somehow hold the moment together. I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice, didn't ask the questions that were already forming in my mind, because I understood what was happening. This wasn't restructuring. This was containment. They handed me a packet, severance agreement, confidentiality clauses, legal language designed to keep everything quiet. I signed it, not because I agreed with it, but because I knew the fight wasn't over. It was just moving somewhere else. When I walked out of that building for the last time carrying a small box with 20 years of my life in it, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. What I felt was something heavier. Uncertainty. Because for the first time in decades, I didn't know what came next, and I hadn't told my daughter. Not yet. Melissa called me 3 days before Christmas. Her voice was bright, almost too bright, the way people sound when they're performing a version of themselves they've already rehearsed. "Mom, you're still coming, right?" she said. "I told everyone you would be here early." Everyone! That word caught my attention. "I was planning to come Christmas Eve morning," I replied carefully. "Is that still okay?" "Perfect," she said quickly. "I need you here by 10, though. I have a lot to finish, and honestly, I could really use your help." There it was. Not "I miss you." Not "I want you here." I need you. I let a small pause settle before answering. "What do you need help with?" "Oh, just everything," she laughed lightly. "The table setting, the dessert prep, organizing the kids' presents. You know how it gets." Yes, I did know how it gets. I had been the one making sure it got that way for years. "I'll be there," I said. "Good," she replied, relief slipping into her tone. "And Mom?" Yes, can you bring those cranberry preserves you made last year? The guests loved them. Guests, not family. Guests. I'll see what I can do, I said. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, my phone still in my hand. The house was quiet. It always was now. No television humming in the background. No second cup of coffee poured out of habit. Just the ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint sound of wind brushing against the windows. 8 years, and I still wasn't used to that kind of silence. I stood up slowly and walked to the pantry, pulling out the jar of cranberry preserves I had made just a week earlier. I had planned to give it to Melissa anyway. Not because she asked, but because I wanted to. That used to matter. The difference between wanting to give and being expected to. I wrapped the jar carefully, placing it in a box along with a few other things I had prepared, small gifts for Ethan and Sophie, a sweater I had picked out for Melissa, a bottle of bourbon for Ryan. Simple things. Thoughtful things. I didn't go overboard this year. Not because I couldn't, but because something in me had shifted. I just didn't know how much yet. The next morning, I drove out to Dublin. The neighborhood Melissa lived in looked like something pulled straight from a magazine spread. Large homes lined up neatly along wide, clean streets. Perfectly trimmed hedges. Identical wreaths hanging on front doors. Lights wrapped around trees with a precision that suggested hired professionals rather than family tradition. Everything about it felt curated. When I pulled into her driveway, I noticed 2 cars already parked outside. One I recognized as Ryan's. The other wasn't familiar. I took a breath before stepping out of my car, smoothing my coat, as if that small gesture could steady the unease building in my chest. Before I could knock, the door opened. Mom Melissa said, her smile-wide arms already reaching for me. She hugged me quickly, warm but brief, and stepped back to look me over. "You look good," she said. "Cold." "A little," I replied. "Well, come in, she said, stepping aside. The moment I walked inside, I understood why she had sounded so energized on the phone. The house was immaculate, not just clean staged. The living room had been transformed into something that looked like a holiday catalog. A tall tree stood in the corner, decorated in gold and white ornaments that matched the ribbon draped across the mantel. The dining table was already set with fine china, polished silverware, and place cards arranged with careful symmetry. Even the scent in the air, cinnamon and pine, felt intentional. It was beautiful. And somehow, it didn't feel like home. Grandma Sophie's voice rang out as she ran toward me, her small arms wrapping around my legs. "There's my girl," I said, bending down to hug her. Ethan followed more slowly, but his smile was just as genuine. "Hi, Grandma." "Hi, sweetheart," I said, pulling him into a hug as well. For a moment, everything felt right again. Simple, real. Then Melissa's voice cut in. "Okay, kids, give Grandma a minute," she said gently. "We have a lot to get done." The moment passed. "Who's here?" I asked, glancing toward the unfamiliar car outside. "Oh," Melissa said almost casually, "just a couple of neighbors. The Whitakers. They're coming back tonight for drinks." Of course they were. "Ryan's in the kitchen," she added. "Go say hi while I finish setting up in here." I nodded and made my way toward the kitchen, my steps slower than usual as I took in the details around me. Everything had its place. Everything had been planned. Everything except the feeling. Ryan stood by the counter scrolling through his phone with a cup of coffee in his hand. "Hey, Andrea," he said when he saw me, offering a polite smile. "Hi, Ryan," I replied. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," he echoed. I set the box I had brought down on the counter. "I brought a few things." "Of course you did," he said lightly. Something about the way he said it made me pause. Not unkind, not ungrateful, just expected. "How's work?" he asked, taking a sip of his coffee. The question landed heavier than he knew. "Busy," I said simply. It wasn't a lie. Just not the whole truth. "Yeah, I bet," he said. "End of year right." Something like that. Before the conversation could go any further, Melissa walked in already mid-sentence. "Mom, I need your help with the table settings," she said. "I can't get the placements right and the candles are off-center." I glanced at Ryan, then back at her. "Of course," I said. For the next few hours, I moved through the house the way I always had, quietly fixing things, adjusting the table, rearranging decorations, helping Sophie with her dress, keeping Ethan occupied while Melissa moved from task to task, her energy sharp and focused. At one point, as we stood side by side aligning the plates just right, Melissa spoke again. "After New Year's," she said casually, not looking at me, "we're probably going to need to revisit a few things." I kept my hand steady. "What kind of things just?" "You know," she said, "the kids' tuition schedule. Some adjustments Ryan and I are working through. Nothing major. Nothing major." "That sounds like something you'll figure out," I replied. She finally looked at me then. "Just for a second." A flicker of something crossed her face. "Uncertainty." "Right," she said slowly. "Of course." We didn't say anything more, but in that moment, something shifted. Because for the first time in years, I hadn't immediately stepped in to solve the problem she hadn't even fully asked me about yet. And she noticed. Later that evening, as the lights dimmed and the house filled with the soft glow of candles and holiday music, everything looked exactly the way Melissa wanted it to. Perfect. Controlled. Impressive. But underneath that polished surface, something fragile had already begun to crack. She just didn't know it yet. And neither did I. Not fully, but I was starting to feel it. That quiet, unmistakable sense that everything we had built between us wasn't nearly as solid as it looked. Dinner preparations had a rhythm to them, timed, measured, almost rehearsed. Melissa moved through the kitchen like she was hosting a show, not a family gathering. Every detail mattered. Every dish had a purpose. Even the way she plated the appetizers felt deliberate, as if someone might be watching closely enough to judge. Maybe someone would be. I stayed out of her way as much as I could, stepping in only when she asked or when something clearly needed fixing. I chopped vegetables, adjusted oven temperatures, wiped down counters. Familiar movements. Comfortable ones. At least they used to be. Around late afternoon, while Melissa was upstairs helping Sophie change into her holiday dress, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Claire Jennings, one of my colleagues from the office. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. The house was already buzzing with activity, and I didn't want to draw attention to anything that might raise questions. But something in me hesitated. Claire wasn't the kind of person who called casually. I stepped out onto the back patio and closed the sliding door behind me before answering. "Hello, Andrea." Claire said, her voice low, urgent. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick up. What's wrong?" I asked, immediately alert. There was a brief pause. "They've started the external review," she said. "It's happening faster than we expected." I leaned against the railing, the cold air pressing against my skin. "That's good, isn't it?" "It is," she said. "But it also means people are talking. Quietly. And your name came up." "Of course it did. They're asking questions about why you left," she continued. "Some people think you were pushed out. Others think you know more than you're saying. I exhaled slowly. They're not wrong. Are you okay? She asked. The question caught me off guard. Not because it was unusual, but because it was the first time anyone had asked me that since everything happened. I'm managing, I said. Another pause. Andrea. You did the right thing, Claire said softly. I just want you to know that. I closed my eyes for a moment. I know I replied. Just be careful who you talk to, she added. And don't sign anything else without legal review. I won't. We hung up shortly after that. I stayed outside for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle around me. The sky had already begun to darken, the first hints of evening creeping in. Inside, I could see the warm glow of the kitchen lights through the glass. It looked peaceful, normal, like nothing had changed. I opened the door and stepped back inside. And that's when everything shifted. Melissa was standing there, right on the other side of the door, her arms crossed, her expression sharp. How long have you been out there? She asked. Just a few minutes, I replied, setting my phone down on the counter. Who was that? She asked. A colleague, I said. From work? Yes. She stared at me for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Why did you step outside to take the call? The question landed heavier than it should have. I didn't want to interrupt what you were doing, I said calmly. That's not what it looked like, she replied. I felt something tighten in my chest. What did it look like, Melissa? It looked like you didn't want me to hear what you were saying, she said. There it was. Suspicion. Is there something you want to ask me? I said. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she stepped closer. Yeah, she said. There is. Her voice lowered, but the edge in it didn't soften. Are you still working? The question hung in the air between us. I could have deflected, could have redirected the conversation, could have bought myself more time. But something in me didn't want to do that anymore. I had spent the last 2 weeks managing this truth quietly, carefully. Maybe I was tired of carrying it alone. No, I said. The word felt heavier once it was spoken out loud. Melissa blinked. What do you mean, no? She asked. I mean, I'm not working anymore, I said. Her expression changed instantly, not confusion, not concern, something else. How long, she asked. Since earlier this month. And you didn't think to tell me, she said, her voice rising slightly. I was going to, I replied. When she cut in. After Christmas, after everything's already been planned, I felt a flicker of irritation. This hasn't exactly been an easy thing to process, I said. For you? She replied quickly. What about us? That word again. What about you? I asked, my voice steady. Melissa let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Are you serious right now? She said. Mom, this affects us too. How, I asked. Her eyes widened slightly as if the answer should have been obvious. Because if you're not working, she said slowly, then I don't know what that means for everything else. Everything else. There it was. Not, are you okay? Not, what happened? Everything else. What exactly are you worried about, Melissa? I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't need to. I could see it in her face, the calculations, the concern, the fear. Not for me, for herself, for the house she finally said, for the kids, for everything we've built, everything we've built. I let those words settle. Then I nodded slowly. I see, I said. She crossed her arms tighter, her posture shifting into something more defensive. You should have told me, she said. I just did. Not like this, she snapped. Not right before Christmas when we have guests coming and everything's already set up. So this is about timing, I asked. It's about responsibility, she said. You can't just drop something like this and expect it not to affect people. People! I felt something inside me go very still. I lost my job, Melissa. I said, my voice quieter now. I didn't plan it. I didn't schedule it around your dinner party. She flinched slightly at that, but only slightly. Do you have any idea how this looks? She said. That question surprised me. How it looks, I repeated. Yes, she said. People are coming here tonight. Neighbors, friends, and now I'm supposed to just... What? Pretend everything's fine while what I asked? She hesitated, then said it. While you're dealing with whatever this is. Whatever this is. I stared at her. Really looked at her, and in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. My situation, my loss, wasn't something she felt with me. It was something she wanted distance from. Like it might spread. Like it might stain the version of her life she had worked so hard to present. I'm not asking you to explain anything to anyone, I said. No, but it's still there, she replied. It changes things. How, I asked again. She didn't answer directly, but her silence said enough, because in her mind, it already had, and we both knew it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The kitchen felt smaller than it had just minutes before, like the walls had shifted inward, closing around the tension that now hung thick in the air. Melissa turned away first. I don't have time for this right now, she said, running a hand through her hair. People will be here soon. I watched her move toward the counter, picking up a dish towel and wiping a surface that was already clean. It wasn't about cleaning. It was about control, Melissa, I said quietly. She didn't look at me. What she replied, her tone clipped. I think we should finish this conversation. No, she said quickly. We shouldn't. Not right now. When then I asked. She let out a sharp breath and finally turned to face me again. I don't know, Mom. Maybe when it's not Christmas Eve and I'm not hosting a house full of people, and I'm not just finding out that my entire situation might be about to change. Your situation, not mine. I'm still the same person I was yesterday, I said. That's not how this works, she replied immediately. Then explain it to me, I said. Her jaw tightened. I don't have to explain basic reality, she said. If you're not working, then things are different. That's just a fact. Different. Such a simple word. Such a heavy one. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Different how I asked again. She hesitated, and for a second, just a second, I thought she might say something real, something honest. But then her expression hardened. I can't carry extra stress right now, she said. Not with everything we have going on. Everything we have going on. The guests, the image, the life she had built so carefully. And I'm extra stressed, I asked. Her silence was answer enough. That's when something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. A realization settling into place. Okay, I said. The words seemed to catch her off guard. Okay, she repeated. Yes, I said. I understand. Relief flickered across her face, but it didn't last long. Because she knew me well enough to hear what wasn't being said. I think it might be better, she began slowly choosing her words, if you... maybe stayed somewhere else tonight. There it was, out in the open, clear, unmistakable. I didn't react right away. I just looked at her, at my daughter, the girl I had raised, the woman I had supported, the person I had shown up for over and over again without question. "Are you asking me to leave?" I said. Her eyes shifted just slightly. "I'm asking you to understand the situation," she replied. "That's not what I asked." She exhaled sharply. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is. Answer the question, Melissa." Her shoulders tensed. "Yes," she said finally. "I think it's better if you stay somewhere else tonight." The words landed softly, but the impact wasn't soft at all. "On Christmas Eve," I said. She closed her eyes briefly as if bracing herself. "It's just for tonight," she said. "We can talk about everything tomorrow." Tomorrow. As if that made it reasonable. As if that made it kind. And what am I supposed to tell the kids I asked? "They don't need to know everything," she replied quickly. "I'll handle it." Of course she would. She would handle the narrative, shape it, control it, the way she controlled everything else. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said again. This time she didn't respond, because this okay felt different. We both knew it. I turned and walked down the hallway toward the guest room, the room I had slept in every holiday for the past several years, the room that had always been mine when I visited. It didn't feel like mine anymore. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then I moved. Not rushed, not frantic, just deliberate. I opened my suitcase and began placing my things back inside. The sweater I had folded neatly that morning, the small bag of toiletries, the gifts I hadn't yet wrapped. Each item felt heavier than it should have, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Time, care, effort, love. All packed away. When I finished, I zipped the suitcase closed and lifted it from the bed. It didn't feel heavy, not physically, but something else did. Something in my chest. A weight I couldn't quite name. I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway. Sophie was standing there. Her small face tilted up toward me, confusion written all over it. "Grandma," she said softly. "Where are you going?" I swallowed. "I have to step out for a little while, sweetheart," I said, forcing a gentle smile. Why, she asked. Behind her, Ethan appeared, his expression more guarded, but just as concerned. I knelt down, setting my suitcase beside me. "Sometimes adults have things they need to take care of," I said carefully. "On Christmas?" Sophie asked, her voice small. The question cut deeper than anything Melissa had said. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "I'll see you soon," I said. It wasn't a promise. Not really. But it was the only thing I could give her in that moment. Melissa's voice echoed from the living room. "Kids, come on. We need to finish getting ready." Sophie hesitated, then slowly stepped back. Ethan didn't move right away. He just looked at me, like he was trying to understand something he didn't have the words for yet. "I'll call you," he said quietly. I nodded. "I'd like that." He gave me a small, serious nod in return before turning to follow his sister. I stood there for a moment longer, watching them disappear down the hallway. Then I picked up my suitcase. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear Melissa moving around the living room, adjusting decorations, straightening things that didn't need straightening. Preparing. Always preparing. I paused by the tree. The lights glowed softly, reflecting off the ornaments in perfect symmetry. For a second, I saw it the way she wanted everyone else to see it. Beautiful. Perfect. complete. Then I opened the door. The cold air hit me immediately, sharp and unforgiving. I stepped outside, pulling my coat tighter around me as the door closed behind me with a quiet final sound. For a moment, I just stood there, on the porch, in the dark, holding everything I had brought with me and everything I was leaving behind. Inside through the window, I could see movement, shadows passing, laughter beginning to rise as guests started to arrive, life continuing without me. I took a breath, then another, and slowly, I walked down the steps. The motel sign flickered like it wasn't entirely sure it wanted to stay on. I almost kept driving. For a few miles after leaving Melissa's house, I didn't have a destination in mind. Just the road ahead, the soft hum of the engine, and the steady rhythm of my own breathing trying to keep everything from unraveling. It would have been easy to turn around, knock on her door, tell myself it was all a misunderstanding. But something in me knew it wasn't. So when I saw the small roadside motel just off the highway, I pulled in without overthinking it. The parking lot was half empty. Snow had started to fall light at first, barely noticeable, then slowly thickening into soft white flakes that settled across the windshield. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, just listening. No voices, no music, no expectations. Just quiet. Inside, the check-in was quick. A man behind the counter barely looked up as he handed me a key card. No questions, no curiosity, just a transaction. Room 12. I carried my suitcase across the icy pavement and unlocked the door. The room was small, plain. A bed, a table, a television mounted on the wall. The kind of place meant for passing through, not staying, which I supposed was exactly what I was doing. I set my suitcase down by the bed and took off my coat, folding it carefully, even though no one would see it. Old habits don't disappear just because the situation changes. For a while, I just stood there. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, and that's when it hit me. Not all at once, but in waves. The image of Sophie's face in the hallway, Ethan's quiet voice, "I'll call you," the sound of the door closing behind me. I pressed my hands together, resting them against my forehead, trying to steady the sudden tightness in my chest. I had spent so many years being the one who held everything together. And now, I wasn't sure what there was left to hold. The television remote sat untouched on the table. My phone buzzed once, then went still again. I didn't check it. I didn't want to see messages that weren't there. Instead, I reached for my purse and pulled out my wallet. Not because I needed anything, but because it gave my hands something to do. Inside, tucked behind old receipts and membership cards, were photographs. Thomas, Ethan as a baby, Sophie in a pink dress smiling with a gap where her front tooth had been, and one of Melissa. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old in that picture. Her hair pulled back into 2 uneven pigtails, her smile wide and unguarded. She had been holding my hand when the photo was taken, looking up at me like I was the center of her world. I stared at that picture for a long time, trying to reconcile that little girl with the woman who had just asked me to leave. At some point, I realized I was crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way grief tends to settle in when it's been waiting for a long time. After a while, I wiped my face and set the wallet aside. Then I reached for my phone. I opened my banking app, not because I needed reassurance, but because I needed clarity. Transaction history filled the screen, line after line of transfers, payments, and deposits stretching back years. Tuition payments to Ethan's school, monthly contributions labeled simply as support, unexpected expenses covered without question. I scrolled slowly, my thumb moving down the screen as the numbers added up in ways I had never taken the time to fully consider. I had always known I helped. I just hadn't realized how much, or how consistently, or how quietly it had become expected. There was no single moment where Melissa had asked for everything. It had happened gradually. A request here, a favor there, a situation that needed solving. And I had stepped in every time, because I could, because I wanted to, because I believed that's what love looked like. But sitting there in that small motel room with nothing but silence and the truth in front of me, I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. I hadn't just been helping, I had been buffering, absorbing the impact of every financial misstep, every overextension, every choice that might have had consequences. I had made sure those consequences never fully landed, and in doing that, I had taught her something. Not intentionally, not consciously, but clearly. I had taught her that no matter what happened, I would catch her. Always. And tonight, for the first time, I hadn't. Or maybe more accurately, I couldn't. A slow breath filled my lungs as that realization settled. It didn't bring anger. Not yet. What it brought was something else. Understanding. Painful, uncomfortable understanding. Melissa hadn't suddenly become someone else. She had become exactly who the situation allowed her to be, and I had been part of that situation. I leaned back against the headboard, staring up at the ceiling as the sound of the heater kicked on with a low hum. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, everything felt still. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked at it. A message from Denise. "Andrea, I just heard from Claire. Call me when you can." I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. "I'm okay. I'll call you tomorrow." It wasn't entirely true, but it was enough. I set the phone down again and closed my eyes, and for the first time since leaving Melissa's house, I let myself sit with the question I had been avoiding. What happens now? Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. The answer didn't come right away, but something else did. A quiet shift, small, subtle, but undeniable. For years, my role had been clear. I showed up, I supported, I solved, I made things easier. But tonight, in this small anonymous room, I wasn't anyone's solution. I wasn't fixing anything. I wasn't smoothing over anyone else's life. I was just me. And somehow, that felt unfamiliar, but not entirely wrong. I opened my eyes and looked around the room again. It wasn't warm. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't home. But it was honest. There were no expectations here. No performances. No unspoken obligations. Just space. And maybe, just maybe, that was where something new could begin. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. Because sometimes, before anything can truly change, you have to see it clearly, even if that clarity comes on Christmas Eve, alone, in a motel room, with snow falling quietly outside. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because the bed was uncomfortable, though it was, or because the heater clicked on and off with an uneven rhythm. I didn't sleep because my mind wouldn't settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself replaying the same moments. Melissa standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, her voice controlled but sharp. "I think it's better if you stay somewhere else tonight." Not please. Not I'm sorry. Just better. For her. At some point, I stopped trying to sleep. I sat up, turned on the small lamp beside the bed, and reached for the envelope in my bag. The one I hadn't opened since leaving the office. I had told myself I didn't need to read it again, that I already knew what it said, but that wasn't entirely true. Knowing something and facing it are two different things. I slid the papers out slowly, smoothing them against the table. The official letter was on top. Position eliminated due to organizational restructuring. Clean, neutral, carefully worded. But underneath that letter was the truth. And that truth lived in the documents that followed. The internal report summary, the legal notes, the agreement I had signed. I picked up the report first. Even now the language was clinical, detached. But I knew how to read between the lines. Recurring discrepancies, unverified approvals, executive-level authorization anomalies. It was all there. Everything I had found, everything I had documented, everything they had tried to minimize. I flipped to the next page. This one wasn't written by me. It was from the external auditing firm that had been brought in quietly after I submitted my findings. The tone was different, more direct, more precise. They confirmed what I already knew. The discrepancies weren't isolated. They weren't accidental. They were part of a structured pattern of financial manipulation, not massive enough to draw immediate public attention, but consistent enough to represent a serious internal breach. And more importantly, they traced upward. Senior-level involvement, approvals that bypassed standard compliance procedures, signatures that didn't align with internal records. I set the paper down, my hands steady despite the weight of what I was holding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an overreaction. I had been right from the beginning. And that truth mattered, even if no one had wanted to say it out loud. I reached for the final document, the one that had mattered most when I signed it, the separation agreement. The language was dense, filled with clauses designed to protect the company, confidentiality, non-disclosure, limitations on public statements. But buried within those pages was something else, something Melissa would never have imagined. The compensation package. I had negotiated carefully, not aggressively, but firmly, because I knew what I had. Evidence, documentation, leverage. The company hadn't fired me because I failed. They had let me go because I knew too much. And they needed to control the narrative. So they paid for that control. A substantial severance, extended benefits, legal protection. Enough to ensure that I would be comfortable. Not just for a few months, for years. I leaned back in my chair, letting that reality settle in. I wasn't financially unstable. I wasn't desperate. I wasn't the burden Melissa believed I had become. If anything, I was the most secure I had been in a long time. And yet, that wasn't the part that stayed with me. Because money, as Thomas used to remind me, was never the point. It was what it represented. Security, choice, independence, and for the first time in a long time, I had all three. Not because someone had given them to me, but because I had stood my ground when it mattered, even when it cost me something. I looked back down at the papers, then carefully slid them back into the envelope. This was my reality, not the one Melissa had imagined, not the one she had reacted to, but the truth. And I had chosen not to share it, not because I was hiding, but because it wasn't ready. The investigation was still ongoing. The consequences hadn't fully unfolded, and more importantly, I wasn't ready to have that conversation yet. Not with her. Not after the way she had looked at me, as if I had suddenly become less, as if my value had shifted the moment my paycheck stopped. That part had nothing to do with the truth about my job. That part was something else entirely. I stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the snow had covered most of the parking lot, softening the edges of everything. It looked quiet, peaceful, untouched. I rested my hand lightly against the glass, and for the first time since everything happened, I allowed myself to ask a different question. Not, what do I do now? But what do I want now? The answer didn't come immediately, but the question itself felt important, because for so long my decisions had been shaped by what others needed. Melissa, the kids, even Thomas in his own careful, thoughtful way. I had built a life around being dependable, reliable, necessary, but somewhere along the way, I had stopped asking what I needed, what I deserved, what I wanted for myself. And now, standing in that small motel room with nothing but time and silence, I realized something. Losing my job hadn't taken everything from me. It had stripped something away, something I had been holding on to for a long time. The idea that my worth was tied to what I provided, to what I could give, to how useful I was to the people around me. Melissa had simply made that visible, painfully, clearly, and now I couldn't unsee it. I turned away from the window and looked around the room again. It was still plain, still temporary, but it no longer felt like a place I had been pushed into. It felt like a place I had landed, and there was a difference, a quiet but important one. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a calendar reminder. December 25th. Christmas Day. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I let out a small breath. This wasn't the Christmas I had imagined. Not even close. But it was the one I had. And maybe, just maybe, it was the one I needed. Not because it was easy, but because it was honest. I reached for my coat, slipping it on slowly. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back to that house. Not today. Not until something changed. And this time, I wasn't the one who needed to change first. By the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, the world outside my motel window looked almost unrecognizable. Snow had covered everything in a quiet, even blanket, softening the sharp edges of the parking lot, muting the dull gray of the building across from me, turning something ordinary into something almost peaceful. For a moment, I just stood there holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, watching the stillness. It was strange. 8 years without Thomas, and I had never once spent Christmas morning alone. Not really. Even when I was physically by myself, there had always been a plan, a destination, a role waiting for me somewhere else. But this morning, there was no schedule, no expectation, no one waiting for me to arrive and fix something, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel rushed. I got dressed slowly, taking my time in a way I rarely allowed myself to. I chose a simple sweater, comfortable jeans, warm boots. No need to impress anyone. No need to match a carefully curated holiday aesthetic. Just me. As I reached for my purse, my phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. "The kids are asking about you." I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering just above it. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Are you okay?" Just, "The kids." I typed a reply. "Tell them I love them. I'll call later." Then I set the phone down. Because as much as I wanted to hear their voices, I wasn't ready to step back into that space yet. Not even through a screen. Instead, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The cold air was sharper than it had been the night before, but it didn't feel as heavy. The sky was clear now, the storm having passed, leaving behind a quiet that felt almost intentional. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Where do you go on Christmas morning when you don't belong anywhere? The answer came to me more easily than I expected. Denise. I hadn't told her everything yet, but I didn't need to. She had been my friend long enough to understand what mattered and what didn't. I started the engine and pulled out of the motel parking lot, the tires crunching softly over the fresh snow. Denise lived about 20 minutes away in a modest neighborhood that felt nothing like Melissa's polished suburb. Her house wasn't large, it wasn't curated, but it was lived in, and that mattered more. When I pulled into her driveway, I noticed the small wreath hanging crookedly on her front door. It made me smile. I knocked once, then stepped back. A moment later, the door swung open. Andrea Denise said, her eyes widening slightly. "What are you doing here?" There was no judgment in her voice, just surprise. "I didn't want to be alone today," I said simply. That was all it took. She stepped aside immediately. "Well, don't just stand out there. Come in," she said. The warmth hit me as soon as I crossed the threshold, not just from the heater, from everything. The smell of coffee, the faint sound of music playing in the background, the clutter of a real home book stacked unevenly, a blanket draped over the couch, a half-finished puzzle on the table. "Sit," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. I was just about to make breakfast. I set my purse down and eased into the couch, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For a few minutes, we didn't talk about anything important. She poured coffee, asked if I wanted eggs, complained about the weather, normal things, simple things, and somehow that made it easier. Eventually, she sat across from me, her eyes studying my face in a way that felt both gentle and direct. "All right," she said. What happened, I could have given her the short version, could have said something vague and moved on. But something in me didn't want to do that. Not anymore. So I told her. Not every detail, not the legal aspects, but the truth. "I lost my job," I said. Her expression softened immediately. "Oh, Andrea, I didn't tell Melissa," I continued. "Not right away." And she found out I nodded. "Last night." Denise leaned back slightly, her gaze steady. "And she asked you to leave." It wasn't a question. "No," I said quietly. She didn't ask. Denise's jaw tightened. "She told me it would be better if I stayed somewhere else," I added. For a moment, Denise didn't say anything. Then she let out a slow breath. "I'm going to say something," she said carefully. "And you're not going to like it." I gave a small, tired smile. "That hasn't stopped you before." "No," she admitted. "It hasn't." She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. "You've been carrying her for years," she said. I didn't respond. Because I knew she was right. And not just emotionally, she continued, financially, practically. You've been smoothing out every rough edge in her life for so long that she forgot what it feels like to deal with them herself. "I was helping," I said. "I know you were," Denise replied gently. "But helping and protecting aren't always the same thing." I looked down at my hands. "I didn't think it would turn into this," I said. "It didn't happen all at once," she said. "That's the problem. It never does." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between us. Then she asked the question I hadn't been ready to answer before. "What are you going to do now?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. Not in terms of what Melissa needed. Not in terms of what the situation demanded. But in terms of me. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Denise nodded. That's okay, she said. You don't have to have it all figured out today. I looked up at her. But you do have to decide one thing, she added. What's that? Whether you're going to go back to being the person who fixes everything for her, or the person who finally lets her stand on her own. The question lingered in the air. Uncomfortable. Necessary. Because I knew the answer mattered. Not just for Melissa, but for me. And for the first time in a long time. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it sit. I let it grow. I let it become something I couldn't ignore, because this time, the choice wasn't about saving someone else. It was about deciding what kind of life I was willing to keep living. Christmas morning at Denise's house didn't look anything like the one I had left behind. There were no coordinated decorations, no polished table settings, no carefully arranged centerpieces meant to impress anyone walking through the door. Instead, there was a slightly crooked tree in the corner with mismatched ornaments collected over decades, a string of lights that blinked out of rhythm, a stack of wrapped gifts that didn't follow any color scheme at all. And yet, it felt more like Christmas than anything I had stepped away from the night before. Denise handed me a plate with scrambled eggs and toast, sliding into the chair across from me like this was something we'd done 100 times before. Eat, she said. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days. I had dinner last night, I said. She raised an eyebrow. At your daughter's, I hesitated. That's what I thought, she muttered, taking a sip of her coffee. For a while we ate in comfortable silence. The kind that doesn't demand to be filled. The kind that lets you breathe. It wasn't until later after the dishes were rinsed and the second round of coffee had been poured that my phone buzzed again. I glanced down. Melissa. I let it ring once. Twice. Denise looked at me over the rim of her mug. You going to answer that? I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I wasn't ready to step back into her world yet. Not when everything was still so raw, so unresolved. But another part of me, the part that still saw her as my daughter before anything else, couldn't let it go unanswered. I picked up the phone. Hello. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then Melissa's voice came through. Mom. Her tone was different, less sharp, less controlled, but not quite soft either. I told the kids you'd call, she said. I said I would, I replied. Another pause. They're opening presents now, she added. Sophie keeps asking where you are. I closed my eyes for a moment. I'll talk to them, I said. Okay, she replied quickly. Hold on. There was a rustling sound, footsteps, then a sudden burst of energy. Grandma Sophie's voice came through the phone, bright and relieved. Hi, sweetheart, I said, my voice softening immediately. Where are you? She asked. Why didn't you stay? I swallowed. I had something I needed to take care of, I said gently. On Christmas, she asked again. Children have a way of asking the questions adults avoid. Yes, I said. Sometimes that happens. I don't like it, she said. I don't like it either, I admitted. There was a small pause. Then Ethan's voice joined in. Are you okay? He asked. The simplicity of the question caught me off guard. Yes, I said. I am. You didn't sound okay yesterday, he said. I smiled faintly even though he couldn't see it. I'm better today, I said. Are you coming back? Sophie asked. The question lingered, heavy, complicated. I'll see you soon, I said carefully. Not a promise, not a lie. Just The truth as much as I could give it. "Okay," she said, though her voice carried a hint of disappointment. "I love you," I added. "We love you too," Ethan said. The call ended shortly after that. When I pulled the phone away from my ear, I realized my hands were trembling slightly. Denise didn't say anything right away. She just watched me. "How are you feeling?" she asked finally. I exhaled slowly, like I'm standing in the middle of something I can't go back from, I said. She nodded. "That's usually where real change starts." I leaned back into the couch, staring at the ceiling. "I didn't think it would be like this," I said quietly. "What did you think it would be like?" she asked. "I considered that. I thought, if something ever went wrong, we'd handle it together," I said. "That's what families do." Denise tilted her head slightly. "Sometimes," she said, "and sometimes they don't." I didn't respond, because I had already seen which version applied to mine. A few hours passed. We watched an old movie, talked about small things, avoided the larger ones that still hovered just beneath the surface. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't rushing to fix anything. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes. I wasn't anticipating the next request. I was just there, present. And strangely, that felt unfamiliar. Sometime in the early afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a notification from my bank. I opened it automatically. A scheduled transfer one I had set up months ago had been declined. I stared at the screen, then I opened the app. It didn't take long to find it. A recurring payment, monthly support. Melissa. I had forgotten to cancel it. Or maybe I hadn't forgotten. Maybe I had just assumed I would keep things the same, that I would smooth it over, that I would step in, like I always had. Denise watched my expression shift. "What is it?" she asked. I turned the phone toward her. She read the screen, then looked back at me. "Well," she said simply. "There it is." I felt a strange mix of emotions rise in my chest. Guilt, relief, clarity, all at once. "She's going to notice," I said. "Of course she is," Denise replied. "She's going to call. Probably." I stared down at the screen again. For years, that transfer had been automatic, reliable, expected, a quiet extension of everything I had been doing for her, and now it had stopped. Not because I had made a grand decision, not because I had drawn a dramatic line, but because something in my life had shifted, and I hadn't rushed to correct it. I set the phone down slowly. "She's going to think I did it on purpose," I said. Denise shrugged lightly. "Did you?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I didn't know. Not completely, but I did know one thing. I hadn't fixed it, and that in itself was new. Outside, the snow had started to melt slightly under the afternoon sun, softening into slush along the edges of the driveway. Inside, everything felt steady, not resolved, not perfect, but steady. And for the first time since everything had happened, that felt like enough. Because sometimes change doesn't begin with a decision. Sometimes it begins with what you choose not to fix. It didn't take long. By late afternoon, my phone rang again. Melissa. This time, I didn't hesitate as long. I picked it up on the third ring. "Hello?" There was no greeting, no soft opening, just a breath on the other end. "And then, Mom, did you stop the transfer?" "Straight to it." I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself before answering. "The payment didn't go through," I said. I know that she snapped. I got the notification. I'm asking if you stopped it. If her voice was sharper now, tighter, not panicked yet, but close. I didn't renew it, I said carefully. There was a pause. Short, but loaded. What does that mean? She asked. It means I didn't set it up again after everything that happened, I replied. After everything that happened, she repeated. Mom, what does that have to do with anything? I leaned back into the couch, my grip on the phone steady. It has to do with the fact that my situation has changed, I said, and I need to take time to understand what that means. For you, she said quickly. But this affects us too. The same words, the same emphasis. Us. I understand that I said. Do you? She replied. Because it doesn't feel like it. I didn't answer right away, because I was starting to realize something. This conversation wasn't about understanding. It was about expectation. Melissa, I said slowly, what exactly are you worried about right now? She let out a breath that sounded more like frustration than anything else. The mortgage, she said. The tuition payment that's due next week. The credit balance we were managing. I asked gently. She stopped. Only for a second. But it was enough. You know what I mean, she said quickly. I do, I replied. That's why I'm asking. Another pause. Longer this time. Look, she said, her tone shifting slightly, softening just enough to sound reasonable. I'm not saying you have to keep doing everything exactly the same. I need some time to adjust. Adjust. To what? To the idea that I might not be there to catch every fall. I understand that, I said again. Then can you just help this month? She asked. Just until we figure things out. There it was. The request. Not framed as a demand, not presented as an expectation, but positioned in a way that made it feel temporary, reasonable, necessary. And for a moment, I felt the old instinct rise, the familiar pull. Fix it, smooth it over, make it easier. That's what I had always done. That's who I had always been, but something stopped me, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. A memory, standing on her porch, holding my suitcase, hearing her say, I think it's better if you stay somewhere else tonight. Better. For her. Melissa, I said, my voice calm if nothing had changed. Would you be calling me right now? The question landed harder than I expected. There was silence on the other end. Then, that's not fair, she said. I'm not trying to be unfair, I replied. I'm trying to be honest. Another pause. Longer this time. I did overreact, she said finally. I'll admit that, but there was something in her tone that told me that wasn't the whole truth. You asked me to leave on Christmas Eve, I said quietly. I said it might be better. You told me to leave Melissa. She exhaled sharply. I was under pressure, she said. Everything was happening at once. You dropped this on me out of nowhere and I didn't know how to handle it, so you handled it by sending me away, I said. That's not what I meant to do, she replied quickly. But it's what you did. Silence again. Heavier now. More uncomfortable. I'm trying to fix this, she said after a moment. But I can't do that if you're pulling away. Pulling away. The words almost made me laugh. Not because they were funny, but because of how easily they shifted the responsibility. I'm not pulling away, I said. I'm stepping back. There's a difference, she said. Yes, I replied. There is. And what does that mean for us? She asked. The question lingered, not as sharp as before, not as defensive, but still centered in the same place. Us, what it meant for her life, for her stability. It means things need to change, I said. In what way? In a way where I'm not responsible for everything that goes wrong, I said. Her breath caught slightly. I never said you were responsible for everything, she replied. You didn't have to, I said. That was the truth. The hardest kind. The kind that doesn't come from words, but from patterns, from years of quiet reinforcement. I don't know how to do this differently, she admitted. And for the first time in the conversation, her voice sounded real, not controlled, not calculated, just uncertain. I softened slightly. Then maybe it's time to learn, I said. Another pause. I just need a little help right now, she said again. Just this once. I closed my eyes, because I knew that phrase. I had heard it before, more times than I could count. Just this once, and every time, it became something more. I can't do that, I said. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth. Unfamiliar, but steady. What she said. I can't step back and still keep things exactly the same, I explained. That's not how change works. So you're just going to leave us to figure it out? She asked. The question carried something new now. Not just frustration, not just expectation, but fear. I'm not leaving you, I said. I'm just not fixing it for you. That feels the same, she replied. I know. I said, and I meant it, because for her, it probably did. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. I didn't think you would do this, she said. I took a slow breath. I didn't think you would ask me to leave on Christmas Eve, I replied. The words settled between us, heavy, unavoidable, and for the first time, there was no immediate response, no quick defense, no attempt to redirect, just silence. Because some truths don't leave room for argument, they just exist. And in that moment, we were both sitting with one. I chose the place carefully, not too close to Melissa's neighborhood, not somewhere loud or crowded where conversations blurred into background noise, and not somewhere intimate enough to soften what needed to be said. A quiet restaurant just outside Columbus. Neutral ground. When I arrived, I asked for a table near the back away from the windows, away from distractions. I wanted this to be contained, clear, focused. Melissa and Ryan arrived together. That in itself said something. They walked in side by side, but not quite in sync. Melissa moved slightly ahead, her posture tense, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. Ryan followed, hands in his coat pockets, his expression harder to read. When they reached the table, there was a brief, awkward pause. Hi, Melissa said. Hi, I replied. Ryan nodded. Andrea. We sat. Menus were placed in front of us, but none of us picked them up. The server came, asked about drinks. We ordered automatically, politely, then fell back into silence once she left. Melissa was the first to speak. I didn't expect you to choose a place like this, she said. It's quiet, I replied. She nodded, though her eyes flicked around the room as if she was still adjusting. Ryan leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze moving between us. So he said, we're here to talk. Yes, I said simply. Melissa folded her hands together on the table. I've been thinking a lot since we spoke, she began. I waited. I know things didn't go well on Christmas, she continued, and I know I didn't handle it the right way. That was as close to an acknowledgement as she had come so far. I nodded once. No, I said. You didn't. Her lips pressed together briefly. I was overwhelmed, she said. Everything hit at once and I reacted. By asking me to leave, I said. Her eyes dropped to the table for a moment. Yes, she said quietly. The words sat there, not defended, not softened, just present. And since then she continued, I've been trying to understand what this all means. For you, I said. She looked up at me. For us, she corrected. I didn't respond, because I wanted her to keep talking. I know you think I only called you about the money, she said, but that's not entirely fair. Then help me understand what part of that call wasn't about money, I said. She hesitated. Ryan shifted slightly beside her but didn't speak. I was trying to figure things out, she said finally. For yourself? I replied. For my family, she said, her voice tightening. And I'm not part of that, I asked. The question landed harder than I intended. Melissa blinked, caught off guard. That's not what I meant, she said quickly. Then what did you mean, I asked. She didn't answer right away, because there wasn't an easy answer, and for the first time she seemed to realize that. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table. I think we need to be very clear about something, I said. Both of them looked at me. This isn't about one night, I continued. And it's not just about my job. Melissa's brow furrowed slightly. Then what is it about? She asked. It's about the pattern that led to that night, I said. Silence settled over the table. You didn't ask me to leave because you were overwhelmed? I continued. You asked me to leave because in that moment I stopped being useful to you in the way you're used to. That's not true, she said quickly. Isn't it? I asked. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Ryan exhaled slowly beside her. Andrea, he said, his voice measured. That's a strong way to put it. It's an accurate one, I replied. He didn't argue. That more than anything told me he understood. I've spent years helping you both, I said, my voice steady. Not because I had to, not because I was asked directly, but because I believed it mattered. Because I believed it was part of being a family. It is, Melissa said. Yes, I agreed. It is, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being something I chose to do and became something you expected. That's not fair, she said again. Then tell me I'm wrong, I said. She looked at me. Really looked at me? And for the first time, she didn't answer immediately, because she couldn't. I let the silence stretch, not to punish her, but to give her space to hear what she had been avoiding. I didn't realize it felt like that, she said finally. That's the problem, I replied. You didn't realize it. Ryan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. I think we both got used to it, he said quietly. Melissa turned toward him, surprised. Ryan. No, he said gently. She's right. The admission shifted something in the air, subtle, but important. We didn't question it, he continued, because it made things easier, and we told ourselves it was temporary or necessary or normal. Melissa's expression tightened. I didn't take advantage of her, she said. I didn't say you did, he replied. But we didn't stop it either. That landed, harder than anything I had said, because it came from him, not me. I sat back slightly, letting the moment settle. Melissa, I said, my tone softer now. I need you to understand something. She looked at me, her eyes uncertain. I didn't lose my job because I failed, I said. Her expression shifted. What do you mean? She asked. I held her gaze. I found something I wasn't supposed to ignore, I said. Something that involved people higher up than me. And when I reported it, they chose to remove me instead of deal with it openly. Her eyes widened slightly. You were fired? She asked. I was pushed out, I said. There's a difference. Ryan leaned back, processing. And you didn't tell us this, he asked. I wasn't ready to, I replied. And honestly, after what happened that night, it didn't feel like something I needed to explain. Melissa shook her head slightly, trying to catch up. So, you're not struggling? She asked. The question was quiet, careful, measured. I studied her for a moment before answering. No, I said. I'm not. The silence that followed was different, heavier, because now the foundation of her assumptions had shifted. You thought I was a problem, I said gently, something that might disrupt your life. She didn't deny it, because she couldn't. And now you're realizing that wasn't the full picture. I continued. Her hands tightened together in her lap. I didn't know, she said. I know, I replied. And I did. But knowing didn't undo what had already been done. This isn't about whether I have money or not, I said. It's about what you believed about me when you thought I didn't. Her eyes filled slightly, but she didn't look away, and for the first time, I saw something different in her expression. Not defense, not justification, something closer to understanding. The silence that followed my words wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Melissa sat very still, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Ryan leaned back slightly, his gaze lowered as if giving her space to absorb what had just unfolded. For a long moment, no one spoke. And I didn't rush to fill it, because for once, I wasn't trying to make things easier. I wasn't softening the edges. I was letting the truth sit where it landed. Melissa was the first to break. I didn't think, she began, then stopped. Her voice faltered. She tried again. I didn't think you would ever be in a position like that, she said quietly. I tilted my head slightly. What position? I asked. She hesitated. Where things weren't stable, she admitted. There it was again. That word, stable. As if stability only existed when everything looked the way she expected it to. And what does that say about how you see me? I asked. She looked up at me, her eyes uncertain. I've always seen you as strong, she said. Strong enough to handle everything I asked. Yes, she said. Even when I shouldn't have to, I continued. That stopped her. Because strength when misunderstood becomes expectation, and expectation when left unchecked becomes entitlement. I didn't mean for it to turn into that, she said. I know you didn't, I replied, and I believed that. But intention didn't erase impact. Ryan shifted in his seat again, his voice quiet when he spoke. I think we both assumed you'd always be okay, he said. I looked at him. And what happens when I'm not? I asked. He didn't answer right away, because that question had never been part of their thinking. I don't know, he admitted finally. Exactly. That was the problem. Not just that I had been helping, but that they had built a life where my help was part of the foundation. without ever considering what would happen if it changed. Melissa's voice came again softer this time. I didn't realize how much we depended on you, she said. I held her gaze. Because you never had to, I replied. The truth wasn't cruel, but it was clear. I made it easy, I continued. Too easy. Her expression shifted, something like guilt beginning to surface. I didn't ask you to do all of that, she said. No, I agreed. You didn't have to. The words settled between us, because we both understood what they meant. She hadn't asked, but she had accepted. Every time. Without question, without hesitation, without thinking about what it cost. I thought... She started again, her voice thinner now. I thought that's just how families worked. Families support each other, I said. But support isn't supposed to replace responsibility. She looked down again. I see that now, she said. Ryan exhaled slowly beside her. So what happens next? He asked. The question hung there. Direct, unavoidable. I leaned back slightly in my chair, taking a moment before answering. Next, I said things change. Melissa's head lifted quickly. In what way, she asked. In a way where I'm not the safety net for every decision you make, I said. Her shoulders tensed slightly. That sounds like you're just stepping out, she said. I am stepping out, I replied, of the role I was never supposed to fill permanently. And what does that mean for us? She asked again. I noticed the pattern. That question always came back to the same place. Us. But now, I answered it differently. It means we have to rebuild, I said. Rebuild what she asked. Everything I replied. The word landed heavily. Trust, I continued. Respect. Boundaries. All of it. Her eyes flickered with something uncertain. That's not something you can just fix overnight, she said. I know, I replied. That's why I'm not trying to. Ryan nodded slightly as if that made sense to him. Melissa, however, looked unsettled. But what about right now, she asked. What about the things we have to deal with immediately? There it was again. The urgency, the need for immediate resolution, the expectation that something would step in, the way it always had. I met her gaze. You deal with them, I said. Her breath caught slightly. On our own, she asked. Yes. She shook her head faintly as if trying to process it. That's a lot, she said. I know, I replied. And I did, because I had been carrying that weight for years. Now it was visible. Now it was real. I'm not saying I won't ever help, I added, but it won't be automatic anymore. It won't be expected, and it won't come at the cost of my own stability or dignity. The last word lingered. Dignity, because that's what had been taken that night. Not money, not security, but something far more personal. Melissa's eyes filled slightly, though she blinked quickly as if trying to hold it back. I didn't think about it like that, she said. I know, I replied again. Silence settled once more. But this time, it felt different. Not as tense, not as defensive. More reflective, because something had shifted. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. After a moment, Ryan spoke again. I should have said something that night, he said. Melissa turned toward him. What she asked. I should have stepped in, he clarified. I knew it didn't feel right. I just didn't want to make things worse. You think staying quiet made it better? She asked. No, he said. I think it made it worse. That truth hung there too, because silence in moments like that isn't neutral. It's a choice. And he was finally acknowledging it. Melissa looked back at me, her voice quieter now. I don't know how to fix what I did, she said. I studied her for a moment, really looked at her, not as the child in the photograph, not as the version of her I had held on to for years, but as the person she was now, flawed, conflicted, capable of both harm and change. You don't fix it, I said. She frowned slightly. Then what do I do? She asked. You take responsibility for it, I replied, and you don't repeat it. And her lips parted slightly as if she expected something more, something easier. But that was it, because real change isn't dramatic. It's consistent. It's quiet. It's proven over time. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to make that process easier for her. I was letting it be what it needed to be. Difficult. Honest. Real. We didn't leave the restaurant with everything resolved. There was no moment where the tension suddenly dissolved, no neat conclusion that wrapped everything into something simple and reassuring. Instead, we left with something quieter, something unfinished, and for the first time that felt appropriate. Outside, the air was cold but clear. The snow from Christmas had mostly melted, leaving behind damp pavement and patches of slush along the edges of the parking lot. Melissa stood beside her car, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, her posture smaller than it had been when she walked in. Ryan moved ahead, unlocking the door, but he didn't get in right away. He paused, glancing back at us as if sensing that something still needed to be said. I'll give you a minute, he said softly, then stepped away, creating space without making it obvious. Melissa and I stood there in the quiet. No distractions, no audience, just the two of us. I didn't expect this to feel like this, she said after a moment. Like what I asked. She exhaled slowly. Like I'm seeing everything differently all at once, she said. Things I didn't question before. I nodded. That's usually how it happens, I said. She looked down at the ground, her boot shifting slightly against the slush. I keep thinking about that night, she continued. About what I said. How I said it. Her voice tightened slightly. I don't recognize that version of myself, she admitted. I studied her for a moment before answering. She didn't come out of nowhere, I said. Melissa flinched slightly at that. I know, she said. That's the part that's hardest to accept. Because it meant the behavior wasn't an accident. It was a reflection of habits, of assumptions, of patterns that had gone unexamined for too long. I was embarrassed, she said quietly. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Embarrassed, I repeated. She nodded, still not looking at me. When I found out you weren't working, she said, it wasn't just about money. It was everything. Everything I asked. My image, she admitted. My life. The way things look. There it was, finally said out loud. Not hidden behind practical concerns, not softened into something more acceptable. Just the truth. I've worked so hard to make everything look stable, she continued, to make it seem like we have everything under control, and me losing my job threatened that, I said. She nodded. Yes. The honesty didn't make it easier to hear, but it made it clearer. And instead of dealing with that feeling, I said, you pushed me out. Her eyes closed briefly. Yes, she said. We stood in silence again. But this time, it wasn't avoidance. It was acknowledgement. I keep replaying Sophie's face, she said after a moment. The way she looked at you in the hallway. I felt a tightening in my chest at the memory. I've never seen her confused like that before, Melissa added. She didn't understand what was happening, I said. Neither did I, she replied. That stopped me. Because it wasn't defensive, it wasn't dismissive, it was honest. I thought I was protecting my family, she said, but I didn't realize I was hurting it instead. I let that sit, because that realization mattered, more than anything she could have said earlier. I don't want to be that person, she said quietly. I looked at her. Then don't be, I said. She gave a small, almost helpless laugh. That sounds simple when you say it like that. It's not simple, I replied. But it is clear. She nodded slowly. I think I've been measuring things the wrong way, she said. How so? I asked. I've been focusing on what things look like, she said, instead of what they actually are. And what are they? I asked. She hesitated, then met my eyes. Messy, she said. I smiled faintly. Yes, I said. They are. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she took a small step closer. I'm sorry, she said. The words were simple, but the way she said them was different. Not rushed, not defensive, not tied to anything else, just present. For asking you to leave, she continued, for the way I spoke to you, for treating your situation like it was something that made you less. The last word caught slightly in her throat. I held her gaze, letting her finish. And for not seeing what you've done for us, she added, not really seeing it. Silence followed, but this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt open. I took a breath. Thank you, I said. Her expression flickered with something uncertain. That's it, she asked. For now? I replied. She blinked. I don't know, she said. I thought you'd say more. I said, but it wouldn't mean more. She considered that, then nodded slowly. I understand, she said, and I believed her. Not completely, not yet, but enough. What happens now? She asked. I thought about that for a moment. Now I said we take time. For what she asked. To let this be real, I replied. Not something we rush past because it's uncomfortable. She shifted slightly as if resisting the instinct to fix it quickly. That's going to be hard, she admitted. I know. I said. She looked back toward Ryan, who was still standing near the car, giving us space. Can I come see you? She asked. The question was careful, not assumed, not expected, just asked. Yes, I said, but not like before. She nodded immediately. I understand, and not because you need something I added. Her lips pressed together slightly. Okay, she said. We stood there for another moment, neither of us moving, neither of us rushing to fill the space with anything unnecessary. Then slowly, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. The hug was different, not quick, not automatic, careful, intentional. I didn't pull away, but I didn't hold on too tightly either, because this wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward, and that required something new, something we hadn't built yet. When she stepped back, her eyes were clearer, not perfect, not resolved, but different. I'll call you, she said. I'll answer. I replied. She nodded, then turned and walked toward the car. Ryan opened the door for her, his expression thoughtful as she got in. Before he followed, he looked back at me. "Thank you," he said quietly. I nodded, not because everything was fixed, but because something had started. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. Not in the moment everything is solved, but in the moment, when the truth is finally allowed to stay. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the kind that feels empty or lonely, but the kind that feels earned. The kind that comes after something has been said out loud and finally allowed to settle. In the weeks after that dinner, I didn't rush back into anything. Not into old habits, not into familiar roles, and not into the version of myself that had spent years filling in the gaps of everyone else's life. Instead, I stayed where I was. Not just physically, but emotionally, steady, present, intentional. Denise insisted I stay with her for a few more days after Christmas, and for once I didn't argue. I didn't say I needed to get back or that I had things to take care of. I allowed myself to rest in a space where nothing was expected of me beyond simply being there. We talked, we laughed, we sat in silence without needing to explain it. And slowly, something in me began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Melissa called 2 days after our dinner, not to ask for money, not to fix anything, just to talk. That in itself was new. "How are you?" she asked. The question was simple, but it landed differently this time. "I'm okay," I said. "And I meant it." She paused. "I've been thinking a lot," she said. "I know," I replied. "I keep noticing things I didn't notice before," she continued. "The way I talk, the way I assume things, the way I expect things." There was no defensiveness in her voice, no justification, just awareness. "That's a start," I said. "I don't want to go back to that," she added. "You won't," I replied, "if you keep paying attention." She exhaled softly. "I'd like to come see you," she said, "just to spend time together. No agenda." I considered it for a moment. Then I said, "Okay." But this time, it was on different terms. When she came over a few days later, she came alone. No children, no distractions, no need to perform anything for anyone else. She brought coffee, not as a gesture to impress, but as something simple to share. We sat at Denise's kitchen table, the same place where I had started to see things more clearly. At first, the conversation was cautious, careful. We spoke about small things, the kids, the weather, her work, my plans. But underneath it all, there was something else. A quiet understanding that this was new, that we were learning how to be in the same space again, without falling into the same patterns. At one point, she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. "I used to talk to you like I already knew what you were going to say," she admitted. I raised an eyebrow slightly, and now I asked. "Now I realize I wasn't really listening," she said. That mattered. More than anything she could have said before. Because listening is where respect begins. "I don't expect things to be the same," she added. "They won't be," I said. "And that's okay," she replied. I studied her for a moment, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough to take the next step. Over the following weeks, things changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but steadily. Melissa began handling things differently. I saw it in the way she spoke about money, less assumption, more awareness. In the way she talked about the kids, less pressure to maintain appearances, more focus on what they actually needed. In the way she approached me, less expectation, more consideration. She didn't ask for help. Not immediately, not automatically. And when she did, it was different, specific, thoughtful, respectful of the boundaries we had begun to build. And for my part, I didn't rush to fill the space. I didn't anticipate her needs before she voiced them. I didn't step in simply because I could. I waited. I listened. I chose. And that made all the difference. My relationship with Ethan and Sophie slowly found its way back to something steady. They didn't understand everything that had happened, and they didn't need to. What mattered was that I was present. That when I showed up, I wasn't distracted. I wasn't preoccupied with fixing something behind the scenes. I was just there, with them. And that felt more real than anything I had been doing before. As for my work situation, the investigation concluded quietly just as it had begun. There was no public announcement, no dramatic fallout, but there were changes. People shifted, positions adjusted, and the truth found its way into the places it needed to be. My attorney called one afternoon with the final details. The settlement was confirmed. Everything was in place. "You handled this well," he said. I thanked him, but what I was really thinking was this: I hadn't just handled the situation at work. I had handled something much closer to home, something that mattered far more. Because losing my job had forced me to see something I had been avoiding for years, that my worth had quietly become tied to what I provided, to how useful I was, to how much I could give without asking for anything in return. And once that was taken away, everything else had been revealed, painfully, clearly, but also, honestly, I moved into my own place a month later, a small apartment, nothing extravagant, but entirely mine. Every decision, every piece of furniture, every detail chosen not for anyone else's comfort or approval, but for my own. It was a different kind of stability, not built on being needed, but on being whole. Melissa came to visit a few weeks after I moved in. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking everything in. "It feels like you," she said. I smiled slightly. "It finally does," I replied. She nodded, and for the first time, there was no tension in the space between us. Not because everything had been erased, but because everything had been acknowledged. We didn't go back to what we were before. We built something new, slower, stronger, more honest. Because this time, it wasn't based on what I could give. It was based on who we were willing to become. And as I stood there in a space that belonged entirely to me, I realized something. That Christmas had taken something from me, but it had also given something back. Not control, not certainty, but something far more important. Clarity. And with it, the freedom to finally choose myself. There's a quiet truth I learned the hard way, one I wish someone had told me years ago. Love, when it has no boundaries, doesn't always stay love. Sometimes it turns into expectation. And expectation, when it goes unchecked, can slowly erase the very person who's giving it. For a long time, I believed that being needed meant being loved. That if I kept showing up, kept helping, kept fixing things, I would always have a place in the lives of the people I cared about. But what I learned is this: being needed is not the same as being valued. And being valued should never depend on what you can provide. Sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do isn't walking away. It's stepping back and letting people face the parts of their lives you've been quietly carrying for them. Not because you don't love them, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop disappearing. If this story spoke to you, I'd really like to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you were only valued when you were helping someone? Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes hearing the truth is the first step toward living it.